Thanks very much, Brenda, and thank you to you all. This is the first opportunity I've had to meet with the infrastructure community since taking up my role some 4 weeks ago or so, and thank you for the opportunity. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about the strategic direction that the government is taking in terms of infrastructure and, most importantly, how that impacts on my portfolio and my department. Minister Albanese this morning outlined for you one of his key directions and one of government's, which is around where is the Commonwealth future engagement on cities and what's the rationale for it. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that and some of the other key drivers which I think will impact on the infrastructure sector, but just as importantly about where my portfolio department is heading into the future. Firstly, returning to this portfolio is a great privilege for myself, and particularly at this time when, I think as one of the speakers said this morning, infrastructure has rarely been as highly acknowledged and as important for Australia's future as it is at the moment. And we've got governments all around the country who are acknowledging, along with the private sector, the importance of getting our investment right across the country in both delivering projects, but importantly starting to plan for the next phase of investment as we as a country move forward. And that's a real change from when a lot of the time I've spent in this portfolio and to now. And what's really different for me returning this time is the fact is that the Australian government now has quite a clear strategic plan. And this mightn't seem as evident as it does from the outside at times when you watch government in action. But this government does have quite a detailed strategic plan and program and areas where it does want to engage for the future. And many of you would have seen the Prime Minister and senior ministers talk about their 3 national objectives. And they catch them under 3 terms. The first is a stronger Australia. And under this banner is where they really focus their economic reform agenda. And under this banner of a stronger Australia, the government is pursuing activities such as the Ken Henry review of tax. You've got the reforms to drive a national seamless economy. You've got the investment that are now taking place in transport, health and education infrastructure, and the national security and defence picture. Really, it's about where does Australia sit as a middle-ranking power and what is our defence and national security picture. And all of that comes under the banner of stronger. The second area for this government in terms of strategic agenda is their reform program around what they call their fairer Australia. And this is the agenda which Minister Albanese touched on in terms of the rationale for the Commonwealth in terms of cities. But it's also the agenda under which they are undertaking their industrial relations reform, their social inclusion agenda, their education agenda and the like, and Indigenous and homelessness agendas and the like, is under this what they call their fairer agenda. And the third agenda, and probably the most challenging for my portfolio, is what the government calls meeting Australia's future challenges. And this is the area where the government has, like cities that Minister Albanese talked about this morning, an indication there are issues which need to be dealt with on a national scale, but for which the Commonwealth is seeking policy directions and trying to formulate national approaches going forward. And this is the area where the government is seeking to deal with issues such as climate change, how they handle water, natural resources issues, the future of hospitals, the productivity agenda and the like. And importantly, that meeting the future challenges is also very much an area which will engage my portfolio in a way that it hasn't previously, about how we start to plan long-term for some of the structural issues for both the workforce and investment. As you all know, the government has a major investment agenda, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and our portfolio has a key role in that. And our primary role is to deliver the government's nation-building agenda in terms of projects. And that's an enormous agenda which ranges from the large infrastructure projects announced in the nation-building program, which they came to office with, the major projects in the budget, but also, just as importantly, all of the various small infrastructure projects across the 554 local councils across Australia, which amount to some 3,800 infrastructure projects. So all up, my department is responsible for a major $26 billion nation-building program over the next 5 years, which is around the road, rail investment. But then also the projects in the budget, the $8.5 billion worth of budget projects which were announced following the consideration of the IA process and then the investment decisions in the budget. And finally, the fiscal stimulus package of infrastructure as well in relation to local community infrastructure. And to give you a feel of that, how broad that range of investment is that we're undertaking in my portfolio, this ranges from the projects currently underway to complete the duplication of the Hume Highway, the work on the Pacific Highway, which at the end of the day the government's got an objective of 85% dual carriageway between Melbourne and Brisbane by 2014. That's the target they've reaffirmed. So there's a massive amount of work taking place in the Pacific, the Hume and the like. and the Newell. The ARTC rail program, which is occurring across Australia, particularly on the east coast and in relation to the Hunter Valley. And importantly, new projects in the budget, such as the projects for the Oakajee Port, the Darwin Port development, and the projects in relation to the South Australian Northern Expressway and the like, and the Victorian Regional Rail project. So they're the major headline projects which we've got responsibility for delivery from a Commonwealth perspective. But as I say, on top of that, we've got about 3,800 local community projects, ranging from some very small community facilities, sporting facilities, right through to some very large projects in communities across Australia. Now, in that major task we've got of delivering of those projects, the critical thing is that our role is as the Commonwealth Delivery Agency. But clearly there are some challenges in that for us because at the Commonwealth level we haven't been a delivery agency. Our role in the past has been a funding agency and a manager of programs. And this new focus that the government has, these three strategic objectives and how they play out, and also this large investment program in the next 5 years, raises some real challenges for me and my portfolio as I start to shape the department to address some of these. The first is we are undertaking a range of projects at the Commonwealth which we previously haven't done. And these are a range of projects such as the ports, right through to the urban transport projects, for which the Commonwealth has not been in that space for some time. And at least 10 years, but importantly, they're not areas in which the Commonwealth has traditionally had a relationship with the state or local government or territory government who's delivering some of those projects, and not a good understanding of the types of issues involved, particularly in urban public transport systems. These projects I've outlined earlier that you've seen in the budget announcements in the government's programs also have quite different risk profiles to what the Commonwealth has traditionally dealt with. We've traditionally, in my department, been a program funding agency to the state or territory governments who've largely managed the risk at that end. But these projects have different risk profiles, and you can see that in a couple of the budget announcements around the Commonwealth's intention to place equity injections into a couple of projects, and also projects which are still very much in the early planning stages, which have a degree of project risk for which the Commonwealth has traditionally tried to have the state manage. And there's some real issues about that because that's not going to be possible into the future. And that has some real issues for how my department operates going forward. A number of the projects I mentioned earlier are not the traditional way the Commonwealth has funded projects. The Commonwealth in the budget announced its intention to provide equity injections into the Oakajee Port, Darwin Port and the Gold Coast Light Rail project, which is not something the Commonwealth has previously done. And it's an area for which we don't have a good understanding. And one of the speakers talked this morning about the Commonwealth's experience in PPPs, which has been relatively limited. And I think there are a number of people in this room who've worked through with the Commonwealth some of the PPP issues in the past, and you wouldn't do it again with us if we did it the same way again. So there's a real process here for the Commonwealth of how we best manage risk and what understanding we have of the private investment issues involved. The speed of delivery is a real issue as well. A number of the projects that my portfolio has to deliver are part of the fiscal stimulus package, and we have to balance the Commonwealth's intention to get those projects moving forward very quickly with the sort of risk-based risk that the Commonwealth's prepared to take in relation to the rollout of these projects. And that's an area which my department needs to work through. Importantly, also, the government is expecting of my department to take much more of a project management role than what the Commonwealth has taken in the past. And you can see that emerging in the way that the Australian government has approached the fiscal stimulus measures, which I've been coordinating for the Australian government in relation to the schools, social housing and transport projects that are part of the fiscal stimulus, where the Commonwealth has quite consciously, through the Coordinated General mechanism, been quite hands-on in a lot of the project development and scoping, much more so than what my portfolio has traditionally been involved in. Now, that's a different area of involvement and a different skill set to what my department has traditionally had, or it certainly has had for many years, in terms of our ability to undertake project management. And finally, the other key issue for my department is the fiscal position. As a number of commentators this morning have mentioned, the fiscal position of the Commonwealth is such that there isn't any latitude for cost overruns or delays. The Commonwealth has a medium-term fiscal strategy which involves returning the budget to surplus and starting to ease Commonwealth investment back